who took some time out this morning to join us. Hopefully make it a fruitful session for you. And indeed, the title of today's webinar is Predictive Analytics, How Can You Be So Sure? As quick agenda of what we're going to cover today, since Trend Data is sponsoring today's webinar, we'll just give you a brief overview of who we are as a company. And then we'll dive right into the topic today. We'll start by talking about, conventional definition of, what is predictive analytics, and then kind of go into three kind of subcategories along that subject. The first being, how do you produce accurate data to do your analytics? The second, some well-known ways of generating predictive algorithms. And then the third, and probably most important, is how you calibrate those algorithms using historical data and testing. After we've done all that, we will do a quick demonstration of the above on the Trend Data solution. We will open it up for questions after that. If you have a question either now or at the end of the presentation, if you could text those use the chat facility and send those questions to Jonathan Webster. He's the organizer today. Jonathan will read them off during the question session. And feel free to do it during the session, just so you remember something at the time it's being discussed. But we'll answer them all at the final segment of the presentation. Again, my name is Tom McEwen. I am the CEO and co-founder of Trend Data. Pleasure to be speaking with all of you. Little background on Trend Data. We are headquartered in Richardson, Texas, which is part of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. We're actually probably about 15 minutes north of Dallas. We launched our company almost 2 years ago in 2017. We sell predominantly to corporate clients, but also to nonprofits, government, really anybody who has a workforce and wants to keep track of it. Our solution is AI-driven people analytics, and we'll go into a little bit more on what that is. But from a solution model standpoint, that is a cloud SaaS offering. So the solution is hosted in the cloud, and all you need is a browser to access it and run your solution. No infrastructure is needed on the client part. Here's a quick look at some of our clients here. We like to point out that we're very cross-industry. So whether you're in healthcare, banking, retail, whatever, we can provide a client or a reference for you if you at some point think of doing business with us, where we can let you talk to someone similar to yourself and find out how we work with our clients. We do have a number of significant partnerships. Among them, ADP, Deltek are companies in the HRIS space that we work with. Talent Guard, a leading talent management company. Engage, very big in AI recruiting. Impact Workforce Technology is a leading vendor management solution. And Predictive HR, which has a solution who's in the same space as us, concentrating mostly on the professional services angle of being able to consult and help you prepare for a solution like Trend Data. So let's get into the presentation and talk a little bit about predictive analytics. I always like to take the Wikipedia definition, or one of the popular definitions out there, and point out that they're not entirely accurate, but this definition says that predictive analytics is the practice of extracting information from existing data sets in order to determine patterns and predict future outcomes. That's actually not a bad definition. I would augment it with one word and say that the predictive analytics predicts likely future outcomes. And we'll go through a lot of what kind of data we're dealing with and how you can actually improve the likelihood of getting better outcomes. So let's talk about the first part. The key to any kind of model, prediction, analytics, metrics is having good data. And I think if I did a survey here, and I should probably put this in for my next webinar, is just a poll. If you had to say on a scale of 1 to 10 how accurate or clean is your data, probably wouldn't get many above 7 or 8. I think particularly in the HR space, most of our clients are very candid about how much they would like their data to be in better shape. So let's take a look at that and see if we can recommend some solutions. First off, there's a lot of different types of data out there that can be called into a solution to actually give you some insights. So basically, it's easy to break it up into 3 categories. The first and most common, and fortunately for human resource and finance, is most of the data you deal with is structured data. So that's data that's been organized into a formatted repository, either you know, an actual database, CRM, ERP type solution, where everything is pretty much broken up into records, individual records that you can tap on and filter by and render. That can also be the same for a lot of flat files, such as Excel and CSV files, which are generated from Excel. They're not actually formal databases, but everything is pretty much in a cell, and you can use that as actually a record very similar to a database when you're looking to extract insights and you know, produce reports and stuff from data. On the other end of that polar scale is unstructured data, which basically is the inverse definition. It doesn't have any conventional data modeling, such as a database, but it's information that can be useful in drawing insights. Probably common in most business applications or world, and it's probably going to get more common, is things such as pictures or text or recordings. Emails are a common thing that recommendations and stuff are done on and like to be imported in and used in analysis. There are still lots of companies that are doing performance reviews on a standard Word doc and then just uploading it into a system where it's just an attachment. So as you can probably guess or see, that this type of data is not as immediately useful as structured data because it's not in that cell type format where you can pull it out and filter and do other things by it. The somewhat remedy to that problem is actually taking the structured data and making it semi-structured data. And this is done by a number of techniques. A lot of it you see actually out on the web, because if you can think of anywhere where there's more unstructured data, it's just articles and stuff out on the web that people go after. And the way companies and you know, content providers address this situation is through a number of methods. One, you can just categorize most of these content productions. You are able to attach an author, create modified dates to it, and maybe even subjects, which can then be classified into cell type repositories where you can actually report on it. And the other way is, as you see it all over the web, and in the example right there, is you can actually tag keywords in the document so that when a search or something is done, it'll go after those keywords. You know, a lot of times when you see, again, out on the web, something that's got a link built to it or something, that's a form of tagging data. So it allows you to take a lot of this unstructured data and put it into a format that you can actually make use of it in conventional database type systems by pulling unstructured data in to sit alongside structured data. I always like to source as much as I can. This is actually a very good overview that was provided by TechTarget in an article about 18 months ago, which I often use. I think it's very relevant. But how do you keep, you know, you're very busy people running your organizations, keeping track of your workforce, trying to have influence on the business. How do you keep track of data accuracy? Because you're constantly bringing in new data from your various data sources. So we always recommend that you have some kind of a monthly checklist to just go through your data and make sure that it's at least on some kind of a regular basis accurate and clean data. And there's 6 points here that I would recommend that you check when you do these monthly checklists. You might have a longer list than this, but these are 3 that we use both for our sales CRM data and of our own internal workforce data. First of all is to check whether the data is up to date. It's tough to do an analysis when the last time you put data in your system is 3 to 6 months ago. Also, one thing you really need to keep a track of is the unique identifiers in the system. And probably the principal one for most of you is the employee ID. You want to keep out of the fact that you might have the same ID multiple times. That might distort not only the number of employees you have in the company, but the number of paychecks you're giving out, the number of people who left the company, or the number of people who might have been hired by a certain source. It might be 3 times the actual number if you're not keeping track of employee IDs, and distort some of your analysis. So good to keep track of, make sure you only have one of these unique identifiers as implied in the name. Also, to make sure as you're bringing data in, the right data types are going into the various fields. Being able to see if you put a date in a field that's supposed to have dollars. I mean, probably some of you have seen that before when you've saved a date, even on a spreadsheet. Next time you open it up, it may be a number and you have no idea what the number means or anything. It's good to be able to track these and make sure you have the right data types in the fields that you're going to do analysis on. Of course, making sure you don't have missing values, and also to be able to track numerical outliers. If the average salary in your company is $80,000 a year, but the average salary in administration is $380,000 a year, that's something you should be able to readily get to, see, and make sure it's corrected. Which kind of falls into the last one, is it's good to have ranges of things that you can catch quickly by your eye when you're looking at something. You pretty much know that the majority of the performance scores might run between 2.5 and 3.5 if you're on a 5-point scale. So if you have 80% of your performance scores at 5 or at 0, it might tell you that there's something wrong with your data. Now, it might seem like a lot of stuff to do one at a time and finding a way to do it, but the best way to do it is to have some kind of a visualization tool, whether mostly on a dashboard, where you can have all of your relevant key factors just come up right away, and pretty much on a quick glance, you're able to see where you're missing data. So you see up in the top there, we had no cost per hire and no time to fill, so we probably haven't gotten a load from our recruiting data recently. Also, you can look down at the hires versus terminations and see we've got 3 months with basically no hiring or terminations or not much to speak of. So that, as an indication, might tell you that you have not uploaded a very recent slice of data into the system. Also, up above the hires and terminations, you can see the reports for manager is actually very high for 3 departments and very low for 3 departments as well. This may not be an error. This just might be the situation where you have to re-allot or hire some managers in your organization to both even that out, so that some of your managers aren't overtaxed and some have bandwidth that you're not making use of. So those are some steps to actually get good data in your system, using a visualization tool, having a test, and also just being able to make sure you're getting good data into the system. The second part we're going to talk about is generating algorithms. As you can see, I put a very complicated screen up there. It's not work for the meek, and I won't go too deep into what goes into generating these algorithms. But I'll talk a little bit about it, some of the more common methods that systems use to calculate algorithms that can stretch into the future. So the first one is regression analysis, and there's a couple of techniques out there. But probably the most common is what's called the least squares technique, which is a way of taking a regression line and putting it in the right place to project out into the future. Now, the way it is done, and this is sometimes better illustrated on a scattergram, but it works for bar charts and line charts as well, is basically you put a line through the middle, or the system puts a line through the middle of all of your entries. and tries to calculate by using square roots which areas are the farthest away from that line. And usually it's plucking out those or trying to minimize those and get this to be the most accurate. And usually what the system will do is take this methodology and recalculate the line and move it to the point where it's actually as best representative of the data as possible. Now these lines don't have to be straight lines, you know, they could be curved, and you'll see this represented in a lot of systems as well, where the linear regression, to be a little more accurate, actually does have some swoops and valleys, particularly if you're dealing with an organization that has you know, a lot of seasonal type of turns to their business. But what this is designed to do is to give you some kind of a trajectory to let you push out into the next month and say, likely based on the way things are going, this is where we're going to be the next month. And using this technique here, you can see we're forecasting even higher turnover in January than we had in prior months. So the trajectory is definitely heading upward. Now, the limitations of this are, first of all, people, environments, economies, businesses are not linear. So in addition to using that type of regression, you got to incorporate other factors. You know, as we can see from the diagram here to the right from Bloomberg, you know, labor market, which is, you know, probably one thing that gives the people on this call, you know, as much stress as anything. You know, it can be high, it can be low. How often is the occurrence of last year or 2 years ago or 10 years ago exactly the same as how things are today? All sorts of things change that. You know, the evolution of the workplace and the worker, technology and innovation. You know, 20 years ago, the idea of you know, doing an office job from home was pretty much you know, unthought of. Then came the internet, smartphones, laptops, and wireless technologies, and people were able to actually be as or more productive at home than they are even in the office. And there's no reason to think that's not going to continue to happen. And then you put on top of that, you know, there was a very big recession 10 years ago. So is taking that snapshot and using that as evidence for time now or a year ago going to be as accurate just by doing a linear progression? Of course not. So you've got to take these other factors into consideration. And what that brings you to is also adding on top of that a way of scoring employees based on factors. So what's very common right now is actually building indexes for employees, which are based on particular groupings that they might be in and the tendencies that that historical data says of what has happened with those groups. So depending on how much data you have, it might be taking the pay of somebody and the median in the organization, where they are in their career, and the expectations of someone at that point looking for training, and just overall tenure. You might have someone at the very end of their career who's just like wanting to work out the rest 2 or 3 years of their life till their kids are out of college and may not be interested in being a vice president, as opposed to someone in the exact same job, making the exact same money, but 20 years younger and with a master's or something. So not to say any of these are facts, but what you do is you take your organizational data and you build indexes. And the goal is not to find out if employee Y is going to leave the company on July 2nd, 2020. The goal is to say, well, we've got 40 employees in this particular category. What are the factors that might cause 15 of them to leave next year? And what can we do to change that? And of course, you know, the more data you have of this type, the more accurate the predictions can be. We always try and get companies to have at least 5 years worth of data, but particularly to have the most recent data, say the last 2 years, as complete and robust as possible. The 5 years ago, you might not have had a commute policy, or at least tracked it in your office. You might not have had industry salary information or career planning or things like that. You know, as things progress, you have more factors. Also, being able to track external data. So, for example, you might be able to find out what people in particular locations or particular industries at particular levels should be making, and comparing that to what you're paying your people, or national averages in turnover and things like that. But also real external data that is not cyclical. Weather. You might look back 2 years ago and find out there was a tsunami in the southeast where you have your call center, and that might skew the data if there hasn't been one since. Supply chain, being able to get things, there are a lot of different factors that you can actually use to really build up and make your model really robust. So once you've got to the point where good data, you've built some good models, and they look like they're informed and enough to actually produce some good results, then you go into the testing phase, which if you've ever worked in software, we spend probably 2/3 of our development time is, you know, testing software. You got to do the same thing with models that you build for workforce predictions. So how do you do this? Well, first of all is getting a platform or a methodology together where you can consistently gather data from everywhere you need to bring things in from, are able to calculate the metrics and analytics that you want to use to predict, and then be able to put some kind of a model together where you can say, if I move this or I do this, whatever, this is going to happen. And once you've done that, you then go out and try and take multiple historical snapshots. So you might have an HRIS system, a payroll system, a talent system, other systems. You want to be able to collect all that data on a regular basis and then run historical snapshots where you can model off of that data and then compare it to what actually happened. So we'll show a few examples of this in the demonstration where you look at, you know, a 6-month, a year snapshot of data, do your predictive model that you're talking about using right now on that data, not incorporating the future data, seeing what that predicted, and then bringing in the actual data and aligning it against the model and see if your model is making sense. And then you can do that as many times with as many snapshots and continually incorporating new factors to where you can calibrate and get your model to where it's as accurate as possible based on those multiple snapshots that you feel confident going forward and using it to do some predictive modeling. And there is, again, some future calibrating as you're going forward, because what you're going to find is, again, conditions might change, whether it's due to technology, whether it's due to you know, your company going into a different business or an additional line of business, whatever. So it's important to be able to repeat these models, incorporating new data, and running it as often as possible so you continually get the best and most practiced tests, so that your modeling and stuff is giving you the most accurate data it can. And that's where an artificial intelligence platform comes in very handy. One, it can run repetitive things, you know, much better than humans can. And the other, it has the intelligence to course correct. So what's happening is, if you're running a model and it's constantly hitting the same bad result every time you run it, the system would know what to offer up to produce a more informed or accurate output. So it adds intelligence to that automation aspect of software, which in the past has always relied on a human to interact and pull a report and say, oh, this keeps happening over and over again. Why am I still running this model? An AI engine, and this is one of the real benefits of AI, is that it can adjust on the fly. And you can see evidence of this again in the demonstration as well. And to the point where, at least for the time being, you're coming out with the most accurate prescriptive answers as to what's going to happen if you do certain things. So before I go into the demo, I just kind of want to regroup some of the best practices to you know, producing a model. You know, first of all is have good data, good historical data. The more the better. The more factors, the better. The more history, the better. And the more external, the better. It's going to give you the best chance at having good predictive indicators. When building the algorithm, again, it's important to take in the multiple factors, both internal and external, in building your algorithm, and then of course to test it, review the results, and update the model, and save yourself headaches. Do that by using an AI platform to actually do that, or a solution with an AI platform. So with that, I wanted to do just a quick demonstration of trend data in some of these instances to give you an idea how you can embark on what might be a daunting project, but one that is very easy to do with the right partner, and also one that you should be doing to stay current. So let me just jump out of here, and I will. So what you're looking right now is at the trend data solution, and we use multiple dashboards, but I wanted to start on the data side to let you know that it is important to bring in as many sources of data as possible. Some recent surveys by IDC and other organizations actually tell us that the typical HR department has anywhere between 5 and 20 different HR systems, the HRIS, the recruiting system, the talent system, the payroll system, and you can see we have examples of all of them here. And then on top of that, wanting to incorporate external data. So you might bring in, salary data, industry benchmark data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or somewhere else, and you might want to do survey data, and we'll kind of talk a little bit to this as well to kind of give you an idea of how that can, in some instances, take the place of, or at least augment, the historical data in your system. So let me go to the main dashboard here, and shows you here essentially a number of different metrics that we've been able to calculate based on the data we've brought in. It's always important to be able to keep track of headcount, revenue per employee is really useful, as well as cost per hire. Anytime, particularly in HR, you can tie dollars to what you're doing. If you want to show turnover, show the economic impact of it. If you want to get the attention of the CEO or the business side of the house, they don't do things necessarily for the basis of would make things easier. They do things because it'll either save money or increase revenues. So we've got those. We've got some survey data here, which I'll reference in a bit, as to how you can look at why people are leaving the company in this instance. We can run compensation versus industry averages, look at the tenure of your workforce, as well as where you're hiring the people. Now, there's a number of built-in out-of-the-box metrics that come with trend data, as well as in recruiting, financial, and you can make these dashboards read any way that you want to bring into the system. But it's also one of the functions of our artificial intelligence is the ability to use natural language, not only to find data, but to create metrics. So if I wanted to, for example, I've got the number of employees I want, but suppose I wanted to show the number of high performers in my organization. What I can do is show employees with performance scores. This is now, the way I did it in this particular example is anybody with a 4 or a 5 performance score is a high performer. So I would just look for everybody in my company that has a performance score greater than 3, and the system will automatically run and give me that answer. And now that was using the natural language capabilities. So it's going to ask me, is this what I was looking for? And I can quickly say, yes, that is in fact what I was looking for. And then it gives me the ability to save this. Since it's only a single value, I'll probably just save it as a number. But if I had multiple values, it would give me the opportunity to choose a graph type to be able to put it on my dashboard. But as I said, I just want to have that number available to me when I log on to the system. And once I do that, you'll see this gets added to my dashboard. And I can just position it and put it anywhere I want to make it look aesthetically pleasing. So you can do that with any any amount of data in the system to construct new metrics. It's not like a BI tool where you have to call the vendor, get X and Y axis, build tables. The system is very intelligent, built on this AI platform, so that I can go in and quickly add new data to the dashboard. But let's kind of move into what we wanted to talk about a little bit. So down here, you can see we have an increasing track in turnover, which is alarming to the company or anybody in the company. If I went to analytics, I could see that not only is this on the rise, but it's also taking a toll on my high performers. You can see that that has really started to increase as I move forward. So again, talking about in the past, what data do I have in the system that tells me how I might attack this problem? So I can actually go and look at a past dashboard that might have a little information that is relevant for this. So here you're looking at the last 6 months of this particular snapshot, which shows indeed what is happening both in performance, high performers and non-high performers. And down below it, we took two relative snapshots from similar time periods a year ago and 2 years ago. Actually, this is a year ago and this is 2 years ago. And unfortunately, what it's not telling us that anything significant. So this is kind of hitting to that point that I was making. What's going on in organizations is not always the same. So it's telling me this is a new problem, this high performer, and I'm not quite sure what is causing it. Over to the right, there's some information during those time periods which we can look at. First of all, we can see that for 2 years, 2017 and 2018, we were actually paying below the industry standard salary across the board. And it looks like at the beginning of this year, we corrected that and gave some good raises, and now we're slightly above the industry average. We can also look and see that we have been letting people work from home for a number of years, although it hasn't been the occurrence as the population has grown. So for example, it looks like the people we let work from home 3 years ago are still working from home, but we haven't really increased that out to the rest of the population. Maybe that's because it's something that has to be earned, and maybe we didn't give it to some of the new people, but that is one trend we can see going up. And then if you go to this final one, looking at professional development, it can tell, again, in the past years, we had, particularly amongst our high-performing population, some professional development, but either we've neglected that policy or people haven't taken use of it, but it started to decline. And going into this year, we have a very much smaller population of high performers that we have in professional development. So that can give us a little insight as to what we might build into some of our predictive models. Let me go back to the other dashboard and just kind of show out what else we can use on top of that data to make some assessments. So first of all, we did an employee survey, which gave us all sorts of reasons why people have left the company. So you can see over here that the biggest reason is relocation. So that means basically someone moved out of, moved away and could no longer keep their job. So that may not be a negative reflection of the company, or it might actually lead us to the fact that maybe someone moved away but could be a good remote employee. It's hard to say when they put down that particular answer. But when we go to the second one, we can see almost as much is people wanting growth opportunities in the company that were not being accorded. And if you go back to that prior graph, we can see that if that's why people are leaving and we're going down in professional development, there might be some correlation there. And then a bunch of others. Often people leave because of their manager. Again, another one, people might have moved because they had children or something. Might be some opportunity for flex time there. And then all around, and compensation is a little lower on here. So this is the result of some data. So we've got some information in addition to the historical that we might be able to put into the formula. And another one over here, which you can look at, is in Tenure. It looks like almost, actually better than half of our population is very new to the company, less than 2 years. So that also might be a reason why we haven't expanded the working remotely as proportionally as it looked in that graph. But using some of this information, let's go in and look at our analytics again, and go to the performance as we were discussing, and see if there's any events that might have happened to cause any of this. Okay, it says we did have an acquisition earlier, and that gave us, probably might have some information. Usually an acquisition unfolds over time. And again, going back to those high performers, perhaps a new layer of managers came in that is causing people to think their careers are not on track as they thought they were. Could be one reason. You can also go back and look at possibly a couple of years back to see if there's any similar occurrences. Now, if you look back, you can see we did do an acquisition back in 2016, which was actually ahead of our snapshots that we were looking at, but something that caused high performer turnover to go way up, and we did do some things to remedy it the next year. So maybe let's go and look into see if any of that historical data, based on everything we've looked at, can help build out a good algorithm. So I'm going to go from here actually into the predictive mode, and what this is telling me is that turnover is going to continue to rise and then plateau a little bit and start to go down. So this gives you kind of an indication why, if we just had linear regression, this would just keep going up forever. But we have other factors included. We've had an acquisition take place before, and maybe things started going in the other direction, and we have all that other data that we pointed at. So we feel like we've got enough to build out some algorithms or models to do some predicting. So let me go to, right now the system shows all the employees in the current view. If I flip over to a summary view, it's going to show me some high-level statistics on associated with turnover. So you can see salary, remote employees, high performers in professional development, and then breakdowns of high performer and non-high performer turnover. And you can also calculate some data along the lines of productivity loss based on some of that employee revenue data. So what I'm going to do also is go and show this again by performance as we were looking at that. And what it's also showing is what's going to keep going up, although at a lesser rate, is the high performer turnover, and the non-high performer turnover is going to stay at a sort of a steady level. So what we've built in is the ability to do a little modeling here. So if I click on the Start Modeling, you can see it gives me an opportunity to change a few things in the future going forward. So right now the system projects that the average salary across the entire company, including executives, is about $145,000 a year. What would happen if I threw money at the problem and just said, well, let's give everybody a $5,000 raise and make that $150,000? Okay, didn't do a lot. You see turnover went from about 5.6 to about 5.4. And if you take 5,000 and multiply by 1,000 employees, you just spent about $5 million with very little result. So let's not do that, at least for the time being, based on our model. And you can see that also might tie back to, we showed that the company did make some adjustments at the beginning of the year and are now paying above industry average. You've also got a lot of people working from home, but you can also see that that's staying kind of steady, as again, what showed in the historical snapshots. What if we did increase that and upped it to 45%? That does seem to have an effect. Overall turnover went down over a point. It looks like it's going to keep pushing things lower. However, the effect seems to be mostly on non-high performers. Now that might still be okay with us. We might want to keep it. But if we're targeting at keeping our best people, perhaps that may not be something that we want to do at this time, and leave it where we have it based on tenure and seniority. Now, what we also saw in the previous model was that, in the previous snapshots, was that we had a declining amount of professional development being offered, and you can actually see the model is projecting that that is going to continue to decline. So if you keep a look on the high performers here, what would happen if we just took that money from giving raises and put it into professional development and increase that to 15% of the population? You can see that goes right to the high performers, and that could possibly be that validation that they're looking for as to the company is interested in building and making future leaders at them. So that predicts a sharp decline in attrition amongst high performers. And you can see that the artificial intelligence in the model says that is a very effective solution. You need to start increasing that even beyond this initial 15%. So you can see how combination of using your historical data, outside salary data, surveys, all of this can go in to produce a model that is more applicable to your organization based on current times than just doing something simple as linear regression and such. And we could do a lot of these models on other things other than attrition. We could do it on where you're hiring, recruiting analytics, as well as performance and other types of things. But wanted to keep it as narrowly targeted at the subject matter of the webinar here today. So what I am going to do is go back to my presentation and at this point open it up for questions. Hopefully everybody has been signaling Jonathan, and we have some questions to answer. Jonathan?
Yes, we do. So first, do you recommend any articles on linear regression or predictive techniques?
Yes. Sorry, I actually used a very good article here, but I tried to find it before the session and couldn't find the exact one I was looking. But if you actually Google linear regression and least squares technique, you'll come up with a number, not only articles, but really good videos that'll explain that in more depth.
Okay. Second question, what metrics are included with the product versus need to be created by the end user?
Well, we have 18 metrics, and we can send you a list of them. So what we did before we introduced version 1 of the solution was we did a survey of 4,000 HR leaders and asked them to give us their top 10 metrics. And we found pretty much of a consensus, but it busted a little outside of 10. So we've got 18 metrics. And if you if I look back at the solution, we've got these 3 from recruiting: cost per hire, time to fill, source of hire. In the financial, we've got revenue per employee, compensation, benefit, talent. We've got performance, professional development, succession planning. And then we've kind of got a catch-all area here for employee demographics, number of employees, reports per manager, and all of these. But you take each of these and you filter them by all the data that you have in the system. And what you'll find is it's really, if you apply the filters, you can have, it could be 500 to 1,000 metrics if you exponentiate back by using the filter. So, 18 top line, but probably, several hundred provided in filtering and such. And that's not counting what you would create through the natural language.
Impressive. Okay. Third question. Can Trendata estimate the probability of people leaving our company by applying the predictive analysis to performance or pay metrics?
Yes, we can do that. I do warn that it's not as accurate when you go down to the individual level. We prefer to do it, again, as I pointed out in the presentation, by groupings of employees with similar factors, so that, again, you could look at a targeted group and be able to estimate it that 10% of them are going to leave, rather than as I said, like Joe's been with us 3 years, is a high performer, makes 5% less than the industry average, as commuting back and forth to New York because his fiance lives there, and saying that he's going to leave after 6 months. We try to shy away from that. But what we do is we do build retention indexes, and you can look at those indexes and compare them to, for example, you might have someone with all those similar capabilities or multiple people with all those similar factors as Joe, and line Joe up next to them and say, well, out of these 5 people who had these exact same attributes as Joe, 4 of them left after 2 years, and give you that kind of an indication. But as I said, we try and shy away from that, but that capability is available. We're just not as confident in being able to push individual predictions.
Very good. All right. Question 4 out of 6 so far. Does Trendata pull in industry standards for you? And if so, how?
Well, we can pull in any data. We actually, there's lots of free data that's out on the web. And if you want us to collect salary data, we always point out that one, because Robert Half and a number of other companies actually provide free reports in many industries for salary comparison. So if and the Bureau of Labor Statistics data is free, so we pull that in a lot. So essentially, if you want some of the free stuff that's out there and you want us to do it for you, yeah, we can do it. You don't have to do any subscribing. We find most of the time, particularly with salary, is companies are already subscribed to salary.com or Mercer or Thomson Financial, and they want us to pull that data in, which of course we just build an API or take whatever the file is and incorporate it in. So a number of different ways. You want the free, we'll charge you just a small setup charge to bring it in. If you want us to pull in sources that you're already paying for, we can do that as well.
Okay, good. So number 5 here is, how many historical snapshots would you recommend testing? I think I got this right. How many historical snapshots would you recommend testing for a predictive model?
I would recommend at least 3 to 5, and as you can kind of see, my example probably wasn't a great one because I couldn't find 3 to 5 snapshots with similar occurrences, but we had enough other supporting data to build a pretty good model. But particularly if, in that example I talked about, if the things are happening right now and you're in the middle of a merger, it's good to go back and pull a snapshot if you've done mergers or acquisitions before to see how that occurred during things. And again, the economic conditions, if you're pulling a snapshot during robust technical financial times, try and pull a snapshot that's also come from robust times. But I would try and say try 3 to 5 with similar as possible surrounding conditions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Does the software integrate with platforms like Ulti Pro so data entry isn't manual?
Yeah, so the you saw Ulti Pro was actually one of the solutions we had on the admin board I showed today. So yeah, we pretty much integrate with all of the major HR sources, Ulti Pro, Deltek, ADP, Workday. And those that we don't, the methodology is very, very similar to build an integration. Because this is an analytics, which is some kind of similar to a reporting engine, the data only has to be pulled one way. So we just set up a feed using their API and ours, and we pull the data in on as regular a basis as you want. Most of our clients that are set up that way pull in the data nightly, but it can be real time if you want from any system.
Okay, that was the final question. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to thank everybody for attending. Just in follow-up, if anybody wants to reach out to me, that's my email and my Twitter feed, and I have a blog at tommckeown.net. But more specifically, if you would like to learn more about Trendata, send an email to marketing@Trendata. If you want to see a further demo or get maybe a better overview of what we offer and maybe how we can partner up with you, we'd love to talk to you. That's our Twitter handle and our website. If you go to trendata.com, you can also sign up for demos or request information. So, even if you're not looking to buy our product, we like to have knowledgeable industry veterans, whether they're working at companies or individual practitioners in our ecosphere, to both bounce our theories off of and get feedback on our solutions, and also keep us up to date on what's going on in the industry. We know we can't keep track of it all. So love to maintain and keep a dialogue with all of you is basically what I'm saying. So thank you for your time. We will have another webinar next month. This one also will make the recording available. So we do these every month, so they're pretty topically oriented. You know, we do usually demonstrate our product to show that the topic that we're talking about. We try to make it not salesy though, so you can get good information out of it without feel like you're being pitched. So thank you all for attending, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Take care.